It wasn't the SUV on my lawn that set me off. It was the sight of Karen dancing beside it with a barbecue tong in one hand and a glass of boxed wine in the other, yelling to her guests that my driveway was community overflow parking now. Her adult son Brad had just finished double parking his massive lifted truck behind her vehicle, completely sealing in my sedan, as if my home were a loading dock. I stood there, holding a binder of documents for a city planning meeting I was already late for, and watched as Brad popped open a beer, laughed, and slapped a "reserved for VIP" sticker on the hood of my car. My hands clenched so tight I nearly crumpled the entire folder. This wasn't the first time they'd pulled something like this, but it would definitely be the last. 2 months earlier, I had moved into this suburban community with the hope of quiet evenings and well-mowed lawns. Instead, I got Karen, the self-declared HOA queen, whose sense of entitlement was matched only by her son's complete disregard for boundaries. Brad didn't live with her officially, but he treated her front lawn, and mine, as his personal truck stop. Their behavior ranged from mildly obnoxious to downright aggressive. One morning I caught Brad draining oil onto the storm gutter right outside my home, and when I confronted him, he offered me a half-eaten breakfast sandwich and said, "Chill, man. It's biodegradable." Karen, overhearing, nodded like he had just solved climate change. At first, I tried to be civil. A note on the windshield. A polite knock. Even a short conversation about respecting driveways and private property. But civility, it turns out, only works when the other party has a sense of shame. Karen doubled down. "We're a community," she said with a patronizing smile. "You shouldn't be so selfish with your driveway. We all have guests, you know." When I mentioned that I couldn't leave my own home, she replied, "That sounds like a scheduling problem on your part." Things simmered for a few weeks, though never really settled. Brad kept parking wherever he pleased. Karen kept hosting impromptu HOA mixer meetings that blocked half the street. And the HOA board? A mix of Karen's friends and enablers who never responded to my complaint. I documented everything. I took pictures. I printed out HOA bylaws. I even checked local municipal codes. But I never pulled the trigger, thinking maybe, just maybe, they'd finally run out of audacity. Then came the flyer. One Friday evening, a piece of neon orange paper was taped to every door on the block. In the largest font possible, it announced the annual Karen's Kickoff Cookout, hosted in her backyard and open to all respectable residents. It included instructions for attendees to park freely in the nearby driveways, because, as Karen wrote in bold, community spirit means sharing space. That same night, I noticed a bright pink sticky note on my mailbox that read, "Jordan, please move your car Saturday from noon to 8 p.m. to make room for guests. Appreciate you. K." That was the final straw. Not only did she expect me to give up my own driveway, she assumed I would comply without so much as a conversation. I didn't respond to the note. I didn't move my car. Instead, I started planning. Saturday morning arrived hot and cloudless. From my kitchen window, I could already see folding chairs and plastic tables being set up. Brad was lugging a cooler out of his truck, parked, naturally, half on her lawn and half on the edge of mine. I ate my breakfast slowly, watching him leave and return with 2 more coolers and a giant Bluetooth speaker. By 11:30 a.m., guests began arriving. They pulled into curbs, up on sidewalks, and of course, across my driveway. Karen was in rare form, wearing an American flag apron and barking orders like a parade marshal. She pointed at my property like a drill sergeant and directed Brad to park his truck right behind my sedan, completely locking it in. I watched in disbelief as he backed up confidently, threw the keys on the grill table, and high-fived another guest. At that moment, my phone buzzed. It was a reminder for my 12:15 p.m. meeting with the city planner. I had been working for 6 months on a proposal to improve green space behind our neighborhood and had already rescheduled this meeting twice. Missing it today would likely kill the initiative for good. I walked outside and tried to keep my tone calm. I asked Karen to move the cars, explaining that I had somewhere important to be. She sipped her wine, looked me up and down, and said, "It's just one afternoon, Jordan. Can't you reschedule again?" I said no, I needed to leave. Her smile vanished. "You always act like the rules don't apply to you," she snapped. "Brad's already set up. We're not moving just because you don't plan ahead." I turned to Brad, who was mid-bite on a burger and holding a frisbee. He shrugged, said, "Sorry bro," and tossed the frisbee back into the crowd of partygoers. I stood there for a second, stunned. My driveway was blocked by people who genuinely believed they were doing nothing wrong, as if my time, my rights, and my property were secondary to their party plans. Karen waved her tongs in my direction. "Go inside, Jordan. You're being a downer." I didn't go back inside. Instead, I went to my office, printed out copies of the HOA bylaws, circled the clause about blocking driveways, highlighted the section on private easements, and grabbed the memory card from my security camera. I sent a message to my lawyer friend, along with photos of the blockage, and he replied in minutes. "You've got everything you need. Call the towing company. Just make sure it's done while the vehicles are still in violation." I looked back out the window. Karen had just turned the music up to full blast. Brad was now shirtless, throwing bean bags with a friend and blocking the sidewalk. My driveway was completely sealed, and Karen's SUV was practically kissing my garage. I didn't even hesitate. I picked up the phone and made the call. 2 trucks would arrive within the hour, and I made sure they'd arrive right in the middle of Karen's opening toast. Because if Karen wanted to turn my driveway into her party lot, then her guests were going to get front row seats to a towaway drama they'd never forget. As I hung up the phone with the towing company, a strange calm washed over me. It wasn't the smug kind of calm, not yet. It was the eerie stillness before a storm breaks. Outside, the barbecue had kicked into full swing. A DJ Karen had probably bartered with was spinning generic summer hits, the kind with too much bass and not enough melody. Plastic folding tables buckled under piles of food, coolers overflowed with beer, and kids ran wild between yards, nearly knocking over lawn chairs. Karen strutted across the scene like a queen inspecting her kingdom, tongs in hand, oversized sunglasses reflecting nothing but her own ego. Brad, now fully shirtless and sunburned despite it being barely past noon, was arguing with someone about who could shotgun a beer faster. My driveway, meanwhile, remained barricaded by their vehicles, an asphalt hostage held in broad daylight. I reviewed my call log and checked the towing confirmation. 2 trucks, ETA 45 minutes, and yes, they'd coordinate their arrival. I gave them the details about the vehicles, described the layout, and even offered them my security footage if anyone tried to claim it wasn't legit. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about power. It was about being pushed so far that the only option left was to hit back harder than they thought possible. And the best part? It would all unfold in front of every neighbor, every party guest, and every person Karen thought she ruled over. It wouldn't just be a tow. It would be a spectacle. But I wasn't done yet. I went back inside, pulled out my home office drawer, and grabbed the HOA binder I'd been forced to keep ever since Karen had personally delivered it, wrapped in ribbon, during my first week here. She'd said, "You'll want to memorize this. We run a tight ship here." I hadn't read all of it then, but over time, I had become painfully familiar with its content. Section 6, page 13. Blocking access to a resident's driveway or private entryway constitutes a violation of Community Code 4.2.1 and is subject to immediate correction and potential fine. Clear as day. I printed that page out, highlighted it, and attached it to my front door with a note underneath. Notice of violation documented and enforced. Just a little appetizer for what was coming next. The city planner texted again, asking if we could meet later in the day. He knew something must be up. I replied with a vague but honest message, running into some driveway drama. "We'll update shortly." He sent back a laughing emoji and said to keep him posted. At least someone was getting entertainment from this mess. Back outside, The scent of overcooked burgers drifted through the air. Guests swarmed around Karen, complimenting her setup. One of them, a tall man in khaki shorts and a pineapple shirt, was gesturing toward my driveway and laughing. I couldn't hear what he said, but Karen's laugh carried across the yard like a foghorn. She looked over at my house, raised her wine glass, and shouted, "Jordan, you're still invited if you promise to smile." Another round of laughter followed. I didn't respond. I simply looked at my phone and watched the tracking dots for the tow trucks get closer. It was around the 30-minute mark when things started to shift. A few guests began asking about parking. A woman in a sundress stood near the edge of my driveway, clearly unsure whether to walk across it. She looked around and eventually tiptoed across like it was a landmine field. Two teenagers tried to squeeze a third vehicle into the gap between Brad's truck and Karen's SUV, but the tires scraped against the curb, and they gave up. That truck now sat awkwardly half on the street, half on the grass. Everything was becoming more chaotic, less organized. Just how I'd hoped. 15 minutes to go. I grabbed my security camera footage, downloaded the most damning clips to a flash drive, and slipped it into my pocket. If anyone dared accuse me of wrongdoing, I wanted the truth ready to go. I also took one last photo of the driveway, clear timestamp, full view of the blockage, guests walking around the cars like it was a public plaza. I forwarded it to the towing company with the message, "For your records. They're still in place." The reply came back fast, "Perfect. We'll be there in 10. I couldn't help but smile as I stepped outside with my iced tea and leaned against my porch railing. Karen saw me and raised her eyebrows. "Changed your mind about joining us?" she called out, her voice artificially sweet. I gave her a casual nod. "Oh, I'll be part of it soon enough." She tilted her head, confused, then shrugged and turned away. Brad was now dancing like an idiot to some bass-heavy remix, sunglasses slipping down his nose as he double-fisted a burger and a beer. And then I heard it, the low rumble of diesel engines approaching from the corner. Two flatbed tow trucks turned onto the street in synchronized motion, like a convoy sent from heaven. They slowed in front of my house, hazard lights blinking. The music didn't stop right away. The party didn't notice at first. But I did. And the moment one of the drivers stepped out and grabbed a tow hook from the side panel, the air shifted. Karen's head snapped around. Her eyes locked onto the truck. Her mouth dropped open. For a second she froze, unsure if it was real. Then, like someone lit a firecracker in her designer sandals, she bolted toward them, waving her arms like she was directing an airplane. "No, no, no. This is private property. You can't do this," she screeched. The tow driver calmly raised a clipboard. "We've got authorization from the homeowner. Vehicles are illegally blocking a private driveway." Karen turned to me, absolutely livid. "Jordan, what are you doing? This is a neighborhood event." I took a slow sip of my tea. "Exactly. And I'd like to participate. But you and Brad are blocking my spot." Brad stumbled over, clearly buzzed, and tried to pull open his truck door, but the driver was already securing the front tires. "Don't touch my rig, man," Brad slurred, puffing up his chest. The second tow operator stepped in, much larger and calmer. "Back away, sir. You're interfering with an active tow." Someone started filming on their phone. Then another person. Within seconds, the spectacle became the center of the entire party. Karen shouted something about the HOA and called them on speaker. Brad tried to yell at the tow driver and tripped backward over a cooler, soaking himself in Gatorade. Guests whispered, then laughed, then started clapping as the trucks winched both vehicles onto the beds. The SUV groaned as it tilted upward. Brad's truck followed soon after, leaving a fresh imprint on my grass that I knew I'd bill them for later. Karen looked like she was about to explode, face red, arms flailing, demanding someone stop this insanity. But no one moved. And when both tow trucks finally pulled away, I turned to the crowd and said, just loud enough to be heard, "Next time, maybe send out parking passes with those flyers." A ripple of laughter followed. Karen stormed off into her backyard, dragging Brad behind her, her barbecue dream already crumbling in the heat. And just like that, I had my driveway back. But this was only the beginning. Because now the whole neighborhood had seen her power get towed right out from under her. And something told me Karen wasn't the type to take public humiliation quietly. The sound of those tow trucks echoing down the block had barely faded when the real chaos began. Karen didn't retreat quietly to lick her wounds. No, she regrouped like a general preparing for war. Her face, a flushed mask of fury, peeked from behind her lattice fence throughout the afternoon like she was planning a siege. The music stopped. The food sat untouched. People wandered away from the party in awkward silence. One brave neighbor tried to cheer things up by slicing the sheet cake Karen had made, but when she saw him handing it out, she snapped that it was for invited guests only and slammed the tray shut. Whatever illusions of community spirit had lingered, they were now charred ruins beneath the emotional mushroom cloud she had just detonated. I didn't expect gratitude from her, of course. But I didn't quite expect what came next either. That evening, as I was tidying up around the house and finally ready to leave for a delayed meeting with the city planner, I found a letter taped to my mailbox. It was written in all caps with bold marker, "Notice. Intent to file HOA violation for hostile conduct." Beneath that was a short message, scrawled in Karen's unmistakable looped handwriting. "You have been reported to the board. You will regret this." I actually laughed out loud. Hostile conduct? I had documented every step, followed every rule, and even given them the opportunity to move their cars before calling the trucks. If anything, I'd been patient. But Karen didn't operate on logic. She operated on outrage and assumed everyone else would bow to it. I took a picture of the letter, filed it with the others in a folder I was now affectionately labeling Karen Chronicles, and went about my business. Later that night, Brad posted a rambling story on his social media. It was mostly incoherent, but the general idea was that I had ambushed them and ruined the community vibe with my power trip. A few of his friends commented in support, but others, neighbors mostly, replied with videos and pictures of the blocked driveway and the tow truck. Some posted clips of Karen yelling, Brad stumbling into the cooler, and me sipping iced tea with quiet satisfaction. Within hours, someone had spliced it into a meme with dramatic music and the caption, "When HOA Karen meets the law." It started spreading fast. By morning, the video had gone semi-viral on a local Facebook group. Even the HOA's own internal page, typically filled with bland posts about bake sales and lawn care, was lit up with arguments. Some residents praised me for finally standing up to Karen's bullying. Others, clearly her allies, condemned the aggressive display and said it set a dangerous precedent. But the most surprising twist came when someone anonymously posted the HOA's bylaws and pointed out the very section I had used to justify the towing. It included screenshots, timestamps, and a link to municipal code. The post exploded with comments. Turns out, I wasn't the only one Karen had crossed. A retired couple on the other side of the block shared that she had fined them for putting up a wind chime. Another woman posted that Karen had once told her visiting parents to park at the grocery store because they didn't look like they belonged. Stories poured in, each one more absurd than the last. The tide was turning. Karen, of course, didn't go down without swinging wildly. She called an emergency HOA meeting that week and insisted it be held in person at the clubhouse. Her goal, as outlined in the agenda she slipped into everyone's mailbox, was to address the recent surge in disruptive, unneighborly behavior and reaffirm community standards. Translation: she wanted to punish me and rally her shrinking base of supporters. I attended, of course. I dressed casually, showed up early, and brought printed copies of all my documentation, including photos, bylaws, time-stamped video stills, and a legal note from my lawyer clarifying my rights. The room filled quickly. What had once been sleepy HOA meetings with 6 or 7 board retirees suddenly felt like a courtroom drama. Even the city planner I had finally met with earlier that week showed up, out of curiosity and, I suspect, amusement. Karen stormed into the meeting like a woman possessed. She had printed handouts of her own, filled with screenshots of Brad's truck being towed and blurry images of me that looked like they were pulled from a soap opera. She opened the meeting with a loud, performative sigh and began with a speech about decorum and respecting shared spaces. But as she spoke, her voice trembled with fury. When she finally pointed at me and accused me of orchestrating a targeted public humiliation, I calmly raised my hand and asked if I could respond. The moderator, a neutral board member who had clearly grown tired of Karen's antics over the years, nodded. I stood, handed out my own documents, and walked the group through what had happened. I explained the rules, showed the footage, and made it clear that I had followed every legal and procedural step available. I even played a short video clip on a projector of Brad slurring and stumbling while calling me names with his truck visibly blocking my car. The room was silent. Then someone chuckled. Then others joined in. Even a few of Karen's usual allies looked down or away. Karen turned beet red and tried to shout over the noise, but no one listened. When she demanded a vote to censure me, the board denied the motion. When she asked for fines to be levied, they refused. And when she claimed I had weaponized towing companies, someone in the back actually snorted and said, "Sounds like you weaponized your own SUV first." Brad wasn't even present. Word had spread that he'd gotten into a shouting match at work over the viral video and had been suspended pending review. Apparently, his company didn't appreciate the bad press of having their logo featured on a drunk man's chest while being towed on camera. At the end of the meeting, a motion was made by another resident, not me, to call for a vote to replace the current HOA leadership. Specifically, to remove Karen as president. The motion passed overwhelmingly. A vote was scheduled for the following week. Karen's face, once smug and commanding, now sagged with the weight of reality. Her reign was coming to an end. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors came up to me, shook my hand, and quietly thanked me. Some offered cookies. One woman gave me a coupon for a local car wash and said it was for surviving the mess. Even the moderator smiled and said, "About time someone stood up to the madness." I walked home that evening feeling lighter than I had in weeks. My driveway was clear. The neighborhood felt less hostile. And Karen? Well, she was about to learn what accountability felt like in full public view. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just about a blocked driveway anymore. This was about the entire neighborhood waking up to a truth they had quietly accepted for too long. Karen's world was built on fear, intimidation, and assumptions. And now, that foundation had begun to crack. As I turned into my yard, the porch light clicked on. I looked down at the sidewalk, clear, unobstructed, and peaceful. Just the way it should have been all along. I took one last sip of iced tea and thought, "We're not done yet, Karen. Not even close." The week leading up to the HOA leadership vote felt like something out of a political thriller, only instead of campaign signs and press conferences, we had yard gossip, homemade flyers, and passive-aggressive Facebook posts. Karen wasn't going down without a fight. Her signature move, of course, was fear. She started slipping anonymous notes into neighbors' mailboxes warning that a power grab was underway and that if she lost the presidency, the neighborhood would descend into chaos. According to her messages, I was a troublemaker, a rule bender, and possibly even a criminal. The absurd part was that she never mentioned the driveway incident directly, as if by erasing it from the narrative, she could make the public humiliation disappear. What Karen hadn't anticipated was that her meltdown at the emergency meeting had been a turning point. People didn't see a leader anymore. They saw a dictator who had turned a suburban HOA into her personal fiefdom. And now that someone had challenged her, and survived, others were ready to speak up. The same neighbors she had intimidated for years were starting to band together, comparing notes, sharing stories, and realizing how many of them had quietly suffered under her self-imposed rule. One older gentleman, Mr. Lawrence, came to my door holding a plastic bag filled with paper scrap. It turned out they were citations Karen had handwritten over the years, accusing him of things like having noisy wind chimes and unsanctioned Halloween decor. His offense that particular year had been putting out a fog machine before October 15th. She said it disturbed the migratory birds. He told me, completely straight-faced. Another woman, Sharon, shared that Karen once threatened to fine her daughter for riding a bike without a helmet. The child was 4 years old and hadn't even left the sidewalk. These stories were ridiculous, yes, but they painted a clear pattern. Karen thrived on control. She used the HOA like a weapon, selectively enforcing rules while ignoring others that applied to her inner circle. Brad had parked his diesel monstrosity across half the neighborhood for months and never received a single warning. But Sharon got a warning for hanging laundry behind a privacy fence. The double standards were too blatant to ignore. As the days passed, I noticed a shift in how people treated me. Neighbors who once offered only tight-lipped nods now waved enthusiastically or stopped to chat. A few even apologized for not speaking up sooner. I never blamed them. I knew what it was like to deal with someone like Karen, how she could make you question whether the rules even mattered when she bent them at will. But now the tide had turned. The HOA wasn't just voting on leadership. They were voting on whether fear would continue to rule the block. Karen, meanwhile, went full scorched earth. She hosted a neighborhood brunch in her backyard the day before the vote. Brad grilled sausages and wore a shirt that said, "Keep the Queen." She had set up banners claiming she stood for tradition, order, and respect. Funnily enough, no one from the current HOA board showed up except one nervous woman who left after 15 minutes. The guests mostly included a handful of her loyal friends and Brad's drinking buddies, who spent most of their time shouting into a karaoke mic and playing cornhole with the intensity of professional athletes. That night, another letter appeared on my door, this one folded neatly into an envelope. Inside was a typed message that began with, "We can settle this like adults." Karen offered to step down quietly if I agreed to publicly apologize for the disruption I had caused and support her in retaining an advisory position. I read it twice just to make sure it was real. Then I laughed so hard I nearly dropped it. She genuinely thought I'd negotiate like we were two heads of state. I didn't bother replying. Some power trips are best ended cold. The night of the vote arrived with all the tension of a season finale. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse again, only this time it was standing room only. People filled the space wall to wall, some fanning themselves with printed agendas, others clutching clipboards or cups of lukewarm coffee. I sat near the back, not wanting to make myself the center of attention. But Karen? She waltzed in with Brad trailing behind her, dressed in a blazer that looked like it belonged to someone 3 sizes smaller and far more respectable. Her entrance was theatrical, her smile forced, and she nodded at people like a celebrity visiting a fan convention. The moderator, the same board member from the last meeting, called things to order. First came the formal reading of the motion to vote for new HOA leadership. Then came the nominations. 3 names were put forward. Mine was not one of them. I hadn't sought office, and frankly, I didn't want it. I just wanted peace and a driveway that didn't double as someone's private parking garage. The candidates were all long-time residents who had experienced Karen's rule firsthand and had reputations for being fair and reasonable. Before the vote, Karen insisted on giving a speech. She stood up, cleared her throat dramatically, and launched into a tirade about tradition, standards, and how certain individuals were trying to undermine the values that held the neighborhood together. Her voice cracked with emotion as she claimed she had sacrificed her time, energy, and social life to protect the community from disorder. It might have worked if she hadn't then accused half the room of being misled by gossip and internet sensationalism. That's when the murmurs started. When the vote began, people moved silently to the front to drop their ballots into a box. Brad watched each person like a hawk, whispering to Karen after every third or fourth slip. When the final vote was tallied, it wasn't even close. Karen lost by a landslide. Every single seat on the HOA board turned over that night. There were no speeches, no fireworks, just the cold, undeniable sound of reality slamming into Karen's world like a wrecking ball. She stood frozen, lips pursed, eyes scanning the room like she couldn't believe what had happened. Brad muttered something about the vote being rigged and threatened to call a lawyer, which prompted more than a few eye rolls. Karen tried to maintain composure, claiming she would be reviewing the bylaws for procedural violations, but everyone knew it was over. The board thanked her for her service and promptly asked for her key to the clubhouse. Outside, people gathered in little clusters, talking and laughing. For the first time in a long while, it felt like a neighborhood again. No one looked over their shoulder. No one flinched at the sound of a car pulling up. Someone even brought out a portable speaker and played music. The impromptu celebration lasted well past sunset. I returned home to find a note taped to my front door once again. This time, it was handwritten but polite. It was from one of the newly elected board members, inviting me to speak at the next HOA meeting about community fairness and neighborhood right. They called it refreshing to see someone stand firm with facts and integrity. I smiled and set the note down beside the others. Karen's threats, her citations, her ridiculous offers. The contrast was satisfying. The days following Karen's fall from her self-proclaimed throne were almost too peaceful. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could walk down the block without catching a death glare from behind oversized sunglasses. Brad's truck didn't appear on my lawn or anywhere near it. He had taken to parking on the other end of the neighborhood, and word had it he was couch surfing at a friend's house after a particularly ugly fight with Karen. Something about the HOA vote exposing him at work had snowballed, and now even his employer was considering disciplinary action for the attention his viral video brought. Ironically, the very internet fame he sought while dancing shirtless at that barbecue had turned on him like a poorly trained dog. Karen, meanwhile, was strangely quiet. No notes, no flyers, no dramatic speeches in front of her hedges. Her house, once the epicenter of HOA activity, had become a shuttered relic. Even the garish garden gnome collection she had placed strategically to discourage kids from cutting across her lawn had disappeared. The neighborhood noticed. People exchanged glances, wondering what came next. It was like spotting a dormant volcano and waiting for the inevitable smoke. 1 week later, the new HOA board hosted a town hall-style meeting, inviting residents to voice their concerns, share ideas, and finally feel heard. It was refreshing. No condescending lectures, no threats of fines for flower pots, and definitely no rants about patriotic color schemes. I wasn't planning to speak, but when the new president asked if anyone wanted to share an experience of how the HOA could better serve the community, a few neighbors nudged me. I stood up, hesitated for a second, and told the story, not about revenge or towing, but about how easy it was to let one person's sense of authority go unchecked when everyone stayed quiet. I talked about the block driveway, sure, but more importantly, I explained how long it had taken for me to stop giving Karen the benefit of the doubt. I ended with a simple point. Neighborhoods aren't built on power, they're built on respect. When I sat back down, there was a short silence. Then applause. Not dramatic or exaggerated, just enough to show it had landed. The board thanked me, and one member even said, "We'll make sure no one's driveway ever becomes public parking again." Everyone laughed, but there was truth in the promise. You could feel it. The meeting ended with plans for a community garden and a list of proposed rule changes, including one that limited how long a vehicle could be parked in front of another resident's property. No one said Karen's name. No one had to. A few days later, a large moving truck pulled up in front of Karen's house. Curtains twitched all over the street as neighbors peeked out to watch. Brad emerged first, his expression a cocktail of bitterness and embarrassment. He stomped around the yard loading boxes into the truck, nearly dropping a lamp on the driveway. Karen followed behind him, barking orders and angrily swiping at her phone. From my porch, I could hear snippets of her voice carrying across the air. She was still complaining, still blaming the HOA vote on a conspiracy, still insisting someone had doctored the footage from the barbecue. No one came to say goodbye. Not a single neighbor offered help, waved, or even acknowledged her departure. It was the kind of quiet exit reserved for people who had burned every bridge and then tried to sell the ashes. As the truck backed out of her driveway, Karen stood on the porch and scanned the block like she was daring someone to stop her. I gave her a polite wave from my lawn chair. She froze, her lips tightening, and then disappeared inside without returning the gesture. Moments later, the front door slammed shut for the last time. Word spread that the house had been listed for sale by a private agent, with instructions that all communication be handled online. That suited the neighborhood just fine. A few people even joked about sending her a farewell gift basket filled with mini traffic cones and tow truck brochures. Someone else suggested a driveway-shaped cake, which got a round of chuckles at the next weekend block party. Yes, there was a block party. A real one. Organized by the new board, it was held in the community park instead of anyone's backyard. There were tables, music, a bounce house for kids, and even a taco truck brought in by a generous resident. I showed up late, not sure what kind of reception I'd get, only to be greeted like an old friend. People offered me plates of food, kids ran past yelling about beanbag competitions, and the atmosphere was light and genuinely joyful. At one point, a couple from the far end of the neighborhood approached me, smiling. The woman said, "We just wanted to say thank you. Not just for what you did with Karen, but for showing us we didn't have to be scared of her." Her husband added, "You gave the rest of us a backbone." I thanked them, but the truth was, all I'd done was finally stop letting myself be walked on. The real shift happened when others decided they were done being stepped over, too. As the sun set and people gathered for a group photo near the community center sign, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't just tolerated in the neighborhood now. I was part of it. Not because I made a scene or played some kind of hero, but because I stood up at the right time. When someone abuses power, it takes only one moment of resistance to remind everyone else that it's possible. Back at home, I sat on my now perfectly clear driveway, sipping iced tea as dusk settled in. The street was quiet except for distant laughter and a dog barking down the block. My car sat where it belonged, no trucks parked sideways, no SUVs boxed in by arrogance. The tension that once gripped this place like a vice had vanished. And yet, I couldn't help but glance over at Karen's old house, now dark and hollow. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered all the notes, the citations, the smug looks, the blocked exits, and the sound of my car doors locking as Brad's truck thundered too close. That memory was all the clarity I needed. I stood, stretched, and walked back inside feeling like something had ended and something better had begun. Maybe it wasn't just about a driveway. Maybe it never was. Maybe it was about a neighborhood learning what it meant to live together without one person trying to rule everyone else. And maybe, just maybe, Karen's departure wasn't the end of the story, but the beginning of a community finally free to breathe. There were no victory parades, no confetti, just a clear driveway, a calm block, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't have to raise my voice to make things right. All it took was one well-timed tow.